Hello, Benjamin.
Hello, Mark. Nice to see you.
You too. So I am Mark Shapiro, artistic director and conductor of Cantori New York, and I am with Benjamin C.S. Boyle. Cantori New York will be premiering a new work that we commissioned from Benjamin Boyle on March 4th at 8 p.m. and March 5th at 3 p.m. at Church of the Holy Apostles in New York City. So this is it's not not our first rodeo, Benjamin.
No,
We go way back.
indeed we do.
So, yeah. Uh, Perhaps it would be interesting to hear from your point of view. How do we know each other?
Well, we met in the year 2000 at the EMA Summer Institute in Paris. Although I think it had a different name back then. I had come as a student. I had just
And
finished, yes,
sorry, EMA is an abbreviation for?
for the European American Musical Alliance,
Right,
which was then only in its sixth year.
right.
Started by my teacher, Philip Lasser from Juilliard, in 1996, five or
Hmm.
six in there. And I
Yeah,
believe you were with him from the very beginning, weren't you?
just about. I
Just
think I
about.
came along second or third year. Yeah.
Right. But at that point, you wouldn't recognize it if you saw it now based on what it was like that. Then I was one of nine students. We were all composers.
Right.
We had one class a day, and, we had
Yeah.
choir with you, which was delightful. Now, of course, I am the associate director of the program. You are the director of the conducting program. And we've been working together for, 20 plus years now.
Yes. So I can share, I think. I remember a piece that you wrote. It was an Ave Maria, I think.
That's right.
And I read all the student submissions, and that piece just blew me away. And we had at that time a guest group that was singing with us, and it blew them away.
Hmm.
So, that really stayed with us. And now look at you now. So,
No,
um, you you are very active as a composer. You write a lot of music for the voice in particular, I think.
that's right.
Um, Tell us just a brief thumbnail, and I'll keep butting in to keep things short, but a
Sure.
brief thumbnail of, what is your composing life about?
Sure. Well, I grew up as a pianist who always thought from day one I was going to be a concert pianist. And then at about the age of 8 or 9, I kind of realized, well, it's too late for that. But, you
Although I
know,
can say you are a terrific pianist. I've heard
well,
you play.
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I can play a bit, but I, kind of realized early on that I was self-taught. I didn't have any training until I went to college. And so I would just always take these pieces that I love by Mozart or Chopin, and I start adding things and changing things and playing wrong notes on purpose. And, I think when I see that in other young people, I think, okay, maybe there's a composer in there somewhere. It's possible. And then, of course, eventually you write your own. They're terrible for a very long time, and eventually you hopefully learn some craft and you can get it together. But if you would ask me if, I'd say maybe 80 or 90% of my music right now is vocal and has been for the past decade. If you would have told that me then, it was like, no way. I'm going to write piano concertos. I'm going to write piano quartets, string quartets, violin sonatas.
Hmm.
And for whatever reason, I got into song very early in my undergrad, somewhere in the mid 90s, and I just loved it. I loved working with singers. I loved working with choir. I loved opera. And
And
I've worked
you
all
you
those.
were a countertenor, right?
That's right. Mostly on the whir on that one.
Yeah.
But yes, I did train as a singer for a couple of years and sang. I've had this good chance of, I always think if you're a countertenor, you can probably find work. There's always some Episcopal church somewhere that needs you if you live on the East Coast like we do. And so I think I've sung for most of them in 3 to 4 of the biggest cities on the East Coast here. So and it's one of these things I encourage my students to do now because I tell them, okay, yeah, you got to get up on Sunday, and it's not so fun, but they're literally going to pay you to learn how to sight read.
Hmm.
Like literally, like
Right.
maybe it won't be much, but they're going to give you money to learn Palestrina. Like, just go
Hmm.
do that.
Yeah. Great advice. Yeah. So, now I remember that you won a Nats Award for a song, right?
That's right. It was my cycle, Spirits in Bondage, which was, I think the year is 2018 or so. That's a cycle of poems by C.S. Lewis. I believe 8 of them. And yeah, so very happy to submit for Nats and win.
And we
Uh,
should just say that's National Association of Teachers of Singing. Yeah.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And that ended up producing a CD, which has the same title which we just released last year, called Spirits in Bondage.
Yes.
This is on Lyric Fest is the group that promoted it, and it's on Innova. Oh no, it's on Parma. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a collection, a 2 CD collection of all songs of mine. So it's over 2 hours of art song. It's a lot.
That is a lot, yeah. And you've also written choral music for The Crossing in particular.
Several pieces for them, including the predecessor to our piece, the second cantata, Voyages, which they recorded and got nominated for a Grammy on, which was great.
Yeah.
And now here's the third cantata for Cantori.
So let's talk about our particular project and how it came about. So why this text? Let's talk about the text. So I guess I could offer a little bit of background there. This because I think I came to you with this idea. We realized that it was going to be the 150th anniversary of the birth of Baudelaire. Mm-hmm. And I thought, who do I know who would respond to that?
There's not too many people anymore.
Yeah. And I thought of you. Then COVID nixed the actual celebration.
Sure did.
Nonetheless, we came up with the text. And then I think it was you who had the idea that came next. Mm-hmm. So tell us about these particular texts.
Well, I should say this isn't the first time I've set Baudelaire. I have 3 different song cycles of his and some other assorted smaller works. So I've used a lot of the text that, was the kind of front and center stuff that most people know. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I've covered a lot of it. Sometimes this happens, I think, when you're dealing with a poet over and over again. When I was younger, I kind of set his younger poems. And now that I'm a little older, I understand better his later poems. And so there's not much later than the ones that we're looking at right now and that are used in this cantata. So these are prose poems written at the very end of his life. So that presents a whole bunch of fun challenges. Prose, of course, being a little bit more flexible in terms of how, not just how it's set, but how the libretto can be crafted out of it. It can be sliced up a little bit easier than a iambic poem. Yeah.
And I want to ask sort of in general and then specifically, so what is it about you and Baudelaire?
Well, I as a kid, I was infatuated with Edgar Allan Poe, like a lot of children. I grew up in Maryland, literally right next to a huge Edgar Allan Poe statue in Baltimore. So, front and center. And then, of course, Baudelaire was the great translator of Poe and brought Poe. Not only did he bring Poe's actual poetry to France, which had a huge influence, but also had a massive influence on him, of course. And, it's almost like a Schumann and Brahms type of thing. It's like they're peas in a pod, just from different places, know.
So I think I'm not wrong in saying they are peas in a pod that is also your pod.
Yeah.
And I think you know what I mean, but I wonder if you could speak to what is that pod?
Yeah, that's a good question. I always hate to use too many flowery adjectives, because I always feel like my music speaks about that better than I do as a human speaker. Sure. But there's something of the Gothic about it that I've always been into. Of course, our tastes evolve, but I had some pretty bad tastes as a kid, reading just Gothic, novels and, just infatuated with like monks and all this kind of weird stuff. And then some of that pours over. But to be honest, for both poets, for Poe and Baudelaire, I really love just the honesty and the straightforward, display of beauty that's on order. It's not a beauty that you have to go find and go, oh, there it is. It's buried under this. No, it's like, this is it. Like, you're going to confront it full force. And I like that unguardedness of the poetry.
I was going to use the phrase force of expression.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah. But I think is characteristic of your music. There's also a kind of opulence that sort of, knowing you personally and, your taste in other things, food. Sure. But yeah, there is, and of course you've set these pieces in French, and I looked it up, and I was actually surprised how much you have written in French.
A bit.
What is that, because you sort of came to Paris as a young man and there you were sort of starting?
that definitely has a big part of it. I do have some French in my family. My grandmother is French, of course, but I never met her, and it didn't. My mother never really kept it going.
Hmm.
So, I had some historical memory of it with the language and familiarity, but I didn't really formally learn to speak French until I was about 16 or 17.
Yeah.
So it was in there, and then of course Paris was Paris, and the rest is history.
Right. And then, so our piece it's a four movement cantata. It's about 25 minutes, something like that.
That's about right.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about the structure and also about the themes of the poems.
Sure. Well, the musical structure first, it's a very symphonic piece, unlike my other cantatas, which are a little bit more akin to Bach-style cantatas with recitatives and arias. This is really a choral cantata, right? And it has only one solo part for one solo voice, which is tenor. It doesn't have, a crew of 4 solo singers or 5 solo singers like many Bach cantatas. This is just one singer and versus the chorus. And it really is versus the chorus. Mm-hmm. And that's maybe ties into the poetry a lot. I promise that I picked this piece before COVID, because I know some people will be like, wow, it's a little on the nose after COVID. I promise, Mark will back me up on this. We picked this text beforehand.
That's right.
But of course, it has some of the classic Baudelaire themes, the kind of worship of divinity by the masses. He was obviously a little clearly anti-religious sentiment there, which he was not the only French person to feel at that time. And
did that inspire you?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a pretty stone cold atheist myself. So, I look at these things and you think about how much amazing music has been written, for example, for the church. I mean, it's just endless. And and you think about what's really behind those composers' thoughts when, what did Bach really think about writing these 210 cantatas in, 20 years? Do you really believe all this stuff, or is it real? I think those are interesting questions, and I don't know if we can answer them, but I think, Baudelaire's that's always in the back of his mind. He's also got this other concept that's like akin to that, which is a very kind of like worship of like some type of female artistic impulse, that he replaces God with in some way. And so there's the very first one of these 4 poems that we're setting, called Le Fou et la Venus, right? The madman and Venus, the goddess, is again about this like impossible worship of something unattainable. Now the piece itself as a whole, of course, it's Les Fous et Leurs Chimères, which is a very arcane title, I know, but fou is better than I, a complicated word. It means masses, but it also kind of means the crazy people. It also kind of means all of the, hoi polloi. It's, I don't know, how do you read it, that title?
Well, I think the mad people.
Yeah.
The mad, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons that these pieces really speak to us as we're rehearsing them, and I can say the group is really loving them. They really cast a spell. And when you sent me some drafts, I think I told you a couple of things that, I woke up one morning with one of the closing lines of the movements in my ear, and this very chilling. And then there was another moment when it was a really nice day out, and I was walking around Broadway with this tune in my head about what a beautiful morning, which was not from Oklahoma. And then I remember it's the opening of the first movement.
Yeah.
And it was, so your tunes really stick with one, which is not an easy thing to do.
No,
it's not. And a lot of, as a lot of people aren't necessarily focused on melody.
No. Or you get a lot of, well, I mean, we could talk musical styles all day and what our preferences are. You and I are pretty well aligned there. But in most of the music that's produced these days, melody is just not even in the cards.
It's not a priority,
Yeah, it's not a priority. And we're dealing here with singers. We're dealing here with voices. I mean, how can you ignore melody? When you're writing for sopranos, it's impossible. And I've never shied away from the big melodies, I mean, I love Brahms, I love Chopin, so that's in my DNA too, but especially when writing for voice. voice. I went to a new opera. I'm not going to name any names. A little while ago, and I was reading in the program notes, the composer was saying, "I want people leaving the hall singing the tunes." I was like, okay, yeah, that's what I would want too if I was writing a new opera.
Mm.
I didn't remember any tunes. I don't think I heard a single tune in the 3 hours that I went. So again, it's I'm not going to say it's a dying art. I think sometimes it's just, you have to put it out there and go for it.
Yeah.
And I've always felt that,
I was thinking I should mention that you mentioned the tenor soloist and singing, and we are fortunate to have an extraordinarily fine tenor soloist who's Daniel McGrew, and who shares the distinction with you of being a winner of the Young Concert Artists
right.
Some years apart. But I think that's a really wonderful piece of synergy there.
Really is. I mean, I can't wait to meet him. I've heard everything that there is on the internet that I could find of his, and he's amazing. So
Yeah,
I'm sure.
He's terrific, and he's perfect for your piece. Yeah.
Well, I definitely listened to a lot of his recordings, as I was going along. So I was like, okay, let's see what I think would suit his voice best.
Yeah. And so something we haven't said out loud yet is it's a cantata in 4 movements for chorus, tenor, and string trio.
Yep, absolutely.
So it seems to me your string writing is pretty demanding.
Yeah, it's tough. It's a lot harder than the vocal writing in a lot of ways, although that's not easy either.
Yeah.
But yeah, especially with trio, I have to say I've never done string trio before. I've done quartet and I've done a lot of string orchestra.
Yeah.
And having to, string orchestra is so great because you could do anything. It's just like a canvas to play with, right? But when you really just have 3 humans with 3 instruments, oh man, it's really limiting. And so the challenge was to get an orchestral sound going that could match the choir with just these 3 instruments. And, we'll see how it works, but I'm pretty happy with the results so far.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really strong. So I think the one, I guess we're almost out of time, but the last question I want to ask is about harmony.
Yes.
So, you and I, as I said, we have a lot of shared experience in the tradition. And it's very striking to me that there are ways in which one feels what you've written could have been written in an earlier era. I don't think that's in any way an indictment of it. I think, on the contrary, not so easy to do, and how fresh it feels. But I wonder if you could speak a little bit about your harmonic style.
Oh, sure. It's funny. You'll get people, I mentioned Schumann and Brahms earlier. You get people that'll say, well, Schumann broke open the mold and did all this new stuff. And then Brahms came in and just picked around the corners and didn't really do anything new. And I say, if you think that, then I'm not sure you know Brahms well enough. Brahms is an incredible innovator. He is not someone who just repeated his teacher. He did incredible new things that no one had ever done. But they are the kind of things that are on the most subtle sides, right? He's not reinventing the tonal world. He's doing it his way, right? I've always liked that concept. I am not somebody who's going to break open the mold and start from scratch like Debussy or Schoenberg. That's not my style, right? I like to take what we have and build something that's totally unique out of it. That's never been heard before, but is still something that, is simple enough for all of us to get it on first go. And that's the kind of needle to thread there, So I revel in these little tiny details of finding this perfect sound or finding a way that I can use a non-chord tone that's in a way that's never been done, that I've never seen in another piece, stuff like that. And so I do think that most people will hear this and think, oh yeah, that could have been written by, I don't know. Well, I would say something like Ravel, although that would mean my piece was much better than it was. But in any case, you know what I mean? And for like maybe the first, I don't know, 10, 12 years, I would get reviews of things like in the Times. It would always say, oh, it's just like Franck, except just, a little bit different. And I'd be like, that's okay place for me to live. I know you mean that as an insult, but I'm quite happy with that, because Franck is a great influence. And so I do bristle at some like terms like neo-romantic. I do not like that because I don't think that this is romantic. I think it just is what it is, and yes, the poetry is romantic, 100%. It was written in the 19th century, but the music is of today.
Yes, for sure. And I think we feel it with an immediacy that is a tribute to its composer. So we look forward to having you with us at the performances.
Can't wait.
I'm going to switch off the recording now. Thank you. And then you and I can have a brief wrap up. So thank you so much, Benjamin Boyle, and we'll see you soon.
Can't wait. Thank you so much, Mark.